Hi student, myself Varsha Rawade, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, Muna Education Societies, Arts, Commerce and Science College Soni. The subject is Advanced Ecology, class MSc second year Botany. The topic of discussion is biodiversity conservation. First one, we will see the definition of biodiversity. After that, the definition of the biodiversity conservation. The biodiversity is also called as the biological diversity. It refers to the sum total of all the varieties and the variability of life in a definite area, or sometime in a particular area there will be different plants, organisms, microbes will be grown in one habitat. This is known as the biodiversity. Next one, the definition of the biodiversity conservation. The biodiversity conservation is the protection, upliftment, and the scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it as its threshold level and derive sustainable benefits for the present and the future generation. In biodiversity conservation, there is the protection, management, preservation, or the restoration of wildlife and the natural resources such as the forest as well as the water. Through the conservation of biodiversity, the survival of many species and the habitats which are threatened due to the human activities. Next one, the biodiversity conservation objectives. There are mainly three objectives of a biodiversity conservation. First one, to preserve the diversity of a species. Second one, the sustainable utilization of a species and a ecosystem. Third one, to maintain the life supporting system and the essential ecological processes. In that, the main objective of biodiversity is maintain or restored the species as well as some ecological resources for the past, for the future generation. The biodiversity is a source of significant economic, aesthetic, health, and cultural benefits which forms the foundation for the sustainable development. So through the biodiversity conservation, we maintain the supporting life system or the essential ecological processes. Then there are two different methods of the biodiversity conservation. First one, in situ conservation, and second one is the ex situ conservation. First one, we see the in situ conservation. In situ conservation is the on-site conservation. In situ conservation of biodiversity is the conversion of species within their natural habitat. In the in situ conservation, the habitat and ecosystem where the organism naturally occur. With the help of in situ conservation, the natural ecosystem is maintained and protected. Some protected areas where in situ conservation takes place. It includes the the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and the Biosphere Reserve. Some are the sacred groves, biodiversity hotspots. These are some examples of the in situ conservation. The first one example of in situ conservation is the national parks. These are small reserve maintained by the government. Means in the national park, some animals will be conserved. This is a small area which maintain or reserve by the government. Its boundary are well demarcated and the human activities such as the grazing, forestry, habitat and the cultivations are prohibited. Means the human activities are not destroy this biodiversity. There are some examples of the national parks. The examples is the Kanha National Park and Bandipur National Park. The first India's national park was established in 1936 as Haley National Park. It is known as the Jim Corbett National Park. It is present in the Uttarakhand. At present, there are 103 national parks in India covering and the area of 40,500 kilometers square, which is 1.23% of the geographical area of the country. Next one example of in situ conservation is the wildlife sanctuaries. It is a particular area there will be no human activities such as the timber harvesting, cultivation, collection of wood and other forest products are not allowed. In this area of wildlife sanctuaries where only wild animals are found and also the tourist visit on this place for the recreation. In this area there is no interfere of human activity with the conservation project. Next one example of in situ conservation is the Biosphere Reserve. The Biosphere Reserves are multi-purpose protected areas where the wildlife, traditional lifestyle of the inhabitant and the domesticated plants and animals are protected. Means in the biosphere region, the protected area will be plants and the animals. In that, the traditional lifestyle or the some domesticated plants will be conserved. The tourist and research activity are permitted in the biosphere reserve areas. The concept of biosphere reserve of the world was established in 1979. Since then, the network of biosphere reserve has increased to the 531 in 105 countries across the world. Now, there are 18 biosphere reserves are found in India. These reserves are rich in a biological as well as the cultural biodiversity and impose unique feature of except, exceptionally pristine nature. There are three different objectives of the Biosphere Reserve. The first one objective of a Biosphere Reserve is the conservation function. To contribute the conservation of a landscape, ecosystem and species variation are in the conservation functions. Second one, the developmental function. Second one objective is the development function. To foster economic and the human development, which is the socio-culturally and ecologically sustainable. The third one objective of the Biosphere Reserve is the logistic function, in that it provides support for research, monitoring, education, and the information exchange related to the local, national, and the global issue of the conservation and the development. The second one method of conservation is the ex situ conservation. It is also called as the off-site conservation. In simple word, ex situ conservation is a set of conservation technique. It involving the transfer of some target species away from its native habitat to a place of safety, such as the zoological gardens, botanical gardens, or the seed bank. The ex situ conservation of biodiversity is involves breeding and the maintenance of endangered species in the artificial ecosystem. Means some zoological parks, some nurseries, and in that area there is a less competitions for the food, water, and space among the organism. The primary objective of ex situ conservation is to support conservation by ensuring the survival of the threatened species and maintenance of associated genetic diversity. Means in this ex situ conservation there is the preserve genetic or reproductive material of the particular target species, or sometime some endangered species in the artificial ecosystem. The ex situ conservation take care of a living target species for the purpose of the reintroduction. These are two different methods of the biodiversity conservation. We will discuss on the biodiversity definition, after that biodiversity conservation, and there are two different methods like in situ conservation and the ex situ conservation. In simple, the in situ conservation is a on-site, means the conservation of a organism in a naturally occurred area or their own habitat. In other words, ex situ conservation is the conservation of a biodiversity outside the natural habitat. In ex situ conservation, some target species are away from their native habitat. So, thank you to everyone